Date with a Debut is a Words and Nerds and Breathe Art podcast co-production, recorded on Awabakal Country. And I pay my respects to all elders past and present and extend that to any First Nations people tuning in. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. On with the show.
In any of these kind of public spaces or any time that we use somebody else's story, their for entertainment or their stumble, their downfall, their worst moment, I think we have some questions we should be asking ourselves as audience members.
Hello, I am Nick Wasiliev, former host of Tell Me What to Read, author of When Men Cry, and I'm continuing this fantastic series with Words and Nerds, shining a light on debut novelists and their journey to publication. If you're looking for a new book to devour, a new author to discover, this is the place to be. If you're looking for writing inspiration, this is the place to be. This is Date with a Debut, because nothing hits you like a first impression. And I'll put a small disclaimer. I am currently in the midst of fighting off a cold, which is sequentially taking my voice as it goes along. So we will power through this review. But I'm so excited because I am joined by Naima Brown. She has spent over a decade working in news, current affairs, and documentaries. Plus, she had a stint in reality TV, which is the inspiration for her debut novel, The Shot, which is published by Macmillan, out in May. Naima, welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. And in typical date fashion, your story is amazing, by the way. I love that you're like the journey that you've had to get to where you are now. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to start your writing journey.
Oh, well, I would say that, I have locked away in a safe so no one can get to them lots of old notebooks and journals full of very earnest short stories and poetry, dating all the way back to the kind of braces days. So I've always written. I've always been a big reader. Over the years, whilst I was doing my quote unquote real job, I would find time here and there to get the occasional short story published or things like that. But, I'd always, I think, had, as many people do, I think as many women do, a sense of who am I to write a book? Who am I to write a novel?
Oh, yes.
And so I kind of kept myself small, even in format, even, in terms of the short story felt like something I could back myself with. And I suppose to that point, The Shot was inspired by, yes, as you mentioned, a very brief stint working on The Bachelor, Bachelorette. And I had that real moment of, the muses landing on your shoulder and saying, there is something here worth exploring in longer form than just the short story format. And so I suppose, scaffolding for The Shot was born. And that took me about 7 years, because that was 7 years of going, do I have something here? Is this worth my time? Do I have the time? And, months, sometimes a year would go by before I'd, had to kind of pick it up and dust it off and have a second glance. And so it took me a while to, to task myself with completing it, and then to be able to step back away from it long enough to think, this is a story, and more widely, I suppose, a conversation that I am really excited about having, and a book I want out in the world so that I can talk about the themes and the ideas that I hope it really sparks.
I'm not surprised that it took you this long, because The Shot has a lot to say. There is a lot to digest and unpack. Stop the podcast! Stop the podcast! Hello, it is Nick Wasiliev here, host of Date with a Debut, and I just wanted to reach out and say thank you to all of our incredible listeners on the Words and Nerds platform who have been listening to the podcast and sending messages of support. It has been absolutely humbling to hear from fellow authors, fellow readers, fellow writers, and fellow podcast listeners about the show, and it is a real privilege to turn you guys on to many exciting new and upcoming authors. The reason why I'm reaching out here is because one of the groups I've heard the most from is a lot of aspiring writers who have been wanting to learn more about the actual process of getting your book into publication. How do you complete a manuscript? How do you find a publisher? How do you complete the editing process? And how do you get that book printed and into stores? Of course, we cannot fully cover it in an episode of the podcast every single week, but I have another podcast that I dropped in 2021 called A Little Idea. This podcast essentially covers my entire process that I went with my debut novel, When Men Cry, from writing to publication to promotion. Over the course of this 5-part mini-series, I sit down with some of the biggest names in the Australian publishing scene to cover this entire process front to back. And the best part, this entire series is completely free and available to listen wherever you get any of your podcasts. Please enjoy this brief snippet from episode 3 of A Little Idea, where I chat with my editor Sylvia Ballog around misconceptions that people have around editors and the value that they can bring to your manuscript.
To me, every world is exciting. It's just really, and I'm not a writer, so to see people come up with these creative worlds, it just always blows me away. So I get very, very enthused about it.
How do you kind of work your way through those kind of misconceptions that people might have towards editors in your own?
Okay, sure. I think...
I'm worried that's like a really loaded question.
No, not at all. I think probably some of the... Some people may think that they don't need an editor at all. Some people think that an editor is actually like a proofreader, which they are in some ways, but proofreading is another sort of profession itself. Where that they just expect the editor to maybe correct spelling and things like that. But what an editor really does is that, like you said, they're there to, and like I mentioned, they're there to hone that manuscript to get the absolute best out of the author in that work.
To hear more, head to the links in the description or head to my website, nickwasiliev.com, and check out my podcast, A Little Idea, and start your own writing journey. All right, back to Date with a Debut. Give us your 1-minute pitch for the shot. What is it about?
My 1-minute pitch. So the shot is, I think, best described as The Hunger Games meets The Bachelor, in the sense that it is based on a reality television show that offers its primary contestant, who is a jilted lover, a woman who's pining over the one that got away, an opportunity to instill herself into his life through what's called total body transformation. So a kind of head to toe, every possible plastic surgery, every possible alteration that could be made to a body so that she can take on a new persona and a new identity through which to try to re-woo. Is that a word? Re-woo? To re-woo.
It is now.
Yes, re-woo, her lost beau. So that's the vehicle. That's the what I do hope is the entertaining kind of boat that we all get in, strap ourselves in, and go, ride along the river. And along that ride in the river, I am really very interested in dissecting, discussing why it is that we find this entertaining, where that line between exploitation and entertainment is. Why do we as a species have a bit of a proclivity towards ritual humiliation? Even within something like The Bachelor, we watch it to see people lose as much as we watch to see someone win, right? And what is that all about? So I think that was a little more than 1 minute. But that would be a long elevator ride. That's when I stood in front of the button and wouldn't let someone out,
We pressed every button on the lift to go up, which is fine. You nail it in describing The Hunger Games meets The Bachelor. That's like, I think that's the best possible 2-second way to put a pin in it, because after reading it, yes, it absolutely is. It is absolutely The Hunger Games meets The Bachelor. And let's talk about this particular topic of where reality TV sits in a little bit more before we dive into the characters. Because I think a lot of people look at reality TV, and maybe this is my own experience or people who I know who watch reality TV, they look at it as something to gawk at. It's something to examine, analyze, maybe even make themselves feel better a little bit about themselves. And when I first picked up the book and read the concept, I thought I was the worst possible person to read this, because I am not a fan of these kinds of shows for a lot of the reasons that we kind of dive into, like the exploitative nature of it sometimes. But yet, it then leaned into a guilty pleasure I have as the story progressed, which is kind of a messed up black comedy kind of worst case doomsday scenario with one of these sort of shows, if that's the best way to describe it, because it involves complete transformation of your identity that Christie has to go through in this book. You don't shy away from the moral questions this form of entertainment asks. Seeing as you worked on these shows, like, what was the points you wanted to address with this book? And I feel like that's a really dense question, but I have to ask it.
Well, no, there's so much in there, and I've tried to make a lot of little, little post-it notes in my brain. I firstly just want to say the copy that you would have had, which is the uncorrected proof, doesn't have what the readers who get the book in its full published glory will have, which is on the rights page. That page that only real book nerds, probably like yourself, myself, and a lot of your listeners who actually read that page. So on that page in the final piece is a statement from myself that says, this is a work of fiction. The author implores any would-be producer not to use this as a how-to manual to create a show like The Shot. And I mention that to say, certainly being a fan of reality television, or even having watched it in passing, is not a requirement for, I hope, for enjoying this book or getting something from this book. I think that we could look at some of the themes that you brought up in other arenas of our lives. So I think in true crime, in social media, in any of these kind of public spaces, or any time that we use somebody else's story, their biographical details for entertainment, or their stumble, their downfall, their worst moment for entertainment. I think we have some questions we should be asking ourselves as audience members. And I certainly don't want to come across as a killjoy or judgy. I'm not sneering at or looking down my nose at reality television at all. I think it's if I had an ulterior motive beyond just hopefully giving you a rollicking ride with a great story, is that you just ask yourself when you find yourself watching these shows and someone is clearly in pain or is struggling or is suffering in some way, why we're watching. And I don't think that it's necessarily always coming from some sort of malicious place. I think we're kind of hardwired as a species to be really interested in each other's lives. I think it probably goes back a long ways that you wanted to peek in the neighbor's cave and see, what they had going on. And I think that there's something deeply human in our curiosity about each other. But where that line is, I think is getting quite blurry, and something worth thinking about.
I love it. The comparison there.
I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. You did. Because it was a dense question. It required a dense answer. And you covered it really, really well with this topic and this discussion. And I love that it's like it's an interesting exercise and examination of comparison. And I love that you also compare it to like true crime, because how many people are so interested in the world of actual crimes and actual evil deeds being committed against one another, and that it actually can come from quite a similar place of just comparison and wanting to know. But also there's another thing which talks about, and we'll now dive into these characters that you've crafted, and there's the two particular people that I want to shout at, that is where is the line in terms of where is this okay for me to watch or not watch? Where is the line between entertainment and exploitation? Let's talk about Christie Shaw. Oh, Christie.
Yeah.
Oh no. She's lovesick. She's desperate to win back the love of Max, and she finds herself going down, honestly, a very dark path in her own body transformation as she's put into this exercise that this show does. And I found it was just the dichotomy of trying to find acceptance through completely rejecting who she is as a person, self-rejection. That the only way that Max can love her is if she completely rejects everything about who she is, and tries to be somebody else. how on earth did this character happen? How?
Oh, well, I mean, I think that, and I don't want to jump ahead and, rope in talking about a second character at the same time, which is Mara, our producer and kind of mistress of ceremonies. But I feel like I can't answer your question about Christy without saying that I see these two women as kind of two sides of the same coin. I think we have a little bit of Christy in all of us, a little bit of Mara in all of us. I think for Christy, yes, I mean, as you said, I think she's somebody who has internalized a lot of trauma. I think she's somebody who has a lot of suppressed rage, and maybe some of that is quite sacred rage and justified rage. She's somebody who's been under the thumb of classism, under the thumb of socioeconomic structures, who feels that she's been left behind by the education system, undervalued, that her potential was never witnessed, observed, cultivated, and championed by anyone around her. And so she's ripe for that power dynamic that exists between Mara and herself, or between a production crew and the talent, right? These power dynamics, boss and employee, president and intern, right?
Yes.
Like whenever you have these power dynamics, I think it's because something in one recognizes something in the other, and they come together for a reason. And I think that Mara saw in Christy somebody who was hungry for just hungry to be witnessed, and for a bit of shepherding. And so that came in the form of an opportunity to do some pretty gruesome things to herself in the name of love. But I think in the end we see that love was not really always her sole motivating factor.
Yes, that's right. And again, let's bring in Mara Bold, because yes, there is a lot of similarities to these two women, but I also just love that she is uncompromising. And on the topic of president and intern, like you often try to do a visualization, and she almost reminded me of Meryl Streep in Don't Look Up sometimes.
Yes.
Like someone strong, confident in what they do, but sometimes, considering what the topic of the shot is about, someone with their priorities and moral compass completely all over the place in some instances. Almost to the point where I loved it. There was a particular line near the end of the book that will not spoil it in terms of ending, but there was the line of just, fuck it, it's great TV. And I just was like, there she is. She is, right there. Such an interesting character.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like, can I turn the tables on you and ask, only because I'm picking up on it, and it wouldn't be the first time that someone, an early reader has expressed to me their misgivings around Christy, or their frustrations around Christy, and how much they like Mara. And what I find so interesting about that is I mean, there's a subversiveness in that in a way, because Mara is patently not a good or well person in many ways.
No.
And she is the anti-hero, right? But I find we get behind her almost in a kind of Tony Soprano way, where you just want this person to win, despite the cost of their winning. And maybe it is because we admire that real confidence, or that real conviction. People who say, fuck it, it's great TV, whatever that might be in their lives, we appreciate that kind of moxie, I guess. But Mara was a joy to write. It's probably more fun to write people who are really in touch with their dark sides than it is to write somebody who's a bit more clean and tidy internally, right? Mara has a lot going on. But again, I think, and when we see this unfold throughout the book, Mara's trauma, the trauma in Mara sees the trauma in Christy, right? These are two women with a lot of untreated wounds. One of them just ends up having a lot more power over the other.
Yes, exactly. I love that you've turned this a little bit, because that is what it is. It's the confidence that Mara has. It's infectious on the page. And also maybe because I think Christie is making choices that I think a lot of us would take a step back from and question and wonder if this is the right way to go about achieving her goals and objectives. And of course, again, it does tie back into that trauma that this trauma that these two women have, and also the key drivers. Love is not necessarily the key driver that we find out, but maybe it's also because maybe it comes from a place of what we want to achieve with entertainment, very much similarly to what we do with reality TV. We had expectations and ideas around what this would deliver. And interestingly enough, as they make choices that are questionable to the reader, it becomes more interesting, more tough to dissect if you are a reader. So it's a great turn on it. This is why I love this. It's a great book. I love the scenario. I love the scenario and the characters you put in here. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, I won't. It's like I'm high-fiving myself in an annoying way, but I will say that these are characters that have stuck with me. I think about them a lot. I think, and this is not some sort of nuanced tease, there's nothing in the works, but I do wonder what their lives might go on to look like beyond this encounter and this experience with each other. Yes, they are both two women who fascinate me.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
3 women, really.
Yes.
3 women who
Yes, true.
Yeah.
I know we have to move on, but I want to kind of finish with one final question, which may be too big of a question to ask. So pull me up if it is the case, because again, like, there are a lot of comparisons you can draw to this thing. Like, obviously Truman Show would come to mind immediately around that line of entertainment and exploitation. Black Mirror also is another one that I always like to. And the ending of this book and we're gonna stay spoiler free, but I will say that the ending of this book really left an impression on me. Where is the line in these shows, in your eyes, between entertainment and exploitation? Where does that sit now?
I mean, I think that, and again, this is a heavily caveated answer in that I'm not I'm not someone who sits around looking at stats and data around viewership or reading any sort of I suppose real studies on the effects of these kinds of shows, not only on viewers but on the people who participate in them. So this is just my own observation, things I've gleaned from living in the world that we live in. And I would say that the line is being renegotiated and reevaluated kind of in real time. I think we're living through a really interesting time in the media space writ large. There's not a part of that spectrum of content from what we would like to consider maybe hard news, pure journalism, whatever that is today, all the way to the most obvious fiction, whether that's in a novel or in a film or on our television. And I think that because we have more options at our fingertips than we've ever had before, because there is this sense of needing to feed the 24-hour entertainment machine. I think because, and again, I know what you're referencing in the end of the book, and I won't spoil it as well, but because once you find something that's shocking on a Monday, if it works, what's going to be shocking come Wednesday needs to be leveled up, right? And so I think that I don't think we know where that line is. I mean, there have been people who have participated in reality television shows who have come out the other side speaking quite vocally about the psychological harm that they experience. There have been people that have spoken out about the way a particular true crime documentary might be produced to elicit a kind of ambulance chasing response favoring the murderer above the memory of the victims, for example. You know, we have these conversations about where that line between entertainment and exploitation should be, but I don't think that we've landed on an answer. I think for me, as somebody who, you know, from time to time does find myself engaged with some of this content, I just try to ask myself how it's making me feel in my body, in my mind. You know, is this icky?
Yeah.
Am I feeling gross? You know, what am I really getting from this? When I'm done watching this or reading this or listening to this, am I coming out the other side better for it? And if it is just pure entertainment, if I am just watching this because I'm lying on the couch and I want to be entertained and I want something simple and light, I suppose, is what a lot of people come to these things for, you know, that don't ask you to think very hard. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. I think we just have to be clear about what we're doing.
I want to ask you about your journey to publication, if I can, because we are talking about debut books, and particularly with this subject matter and and how the word juicy it is, that how much you can dissect from it. What was that like? What was it like bringing this story to reality?
Incredible. I mentioned that it took me 7 years to write and the reasons why, but I don't lament that. And I think that, you know, for this book in particular, for this subject matter that I am tackling in this book, the time that it took only served this story. These, you know, the world of reality television, everything you and I have just discussed, these things have only just ratcheted up. You know, in the final year of writing, we were thinking about something like Squid Game, for example, and, you know, really grappling with what a show like that is meant to teach us, or what we're meant to receive as audiences from a show like that, and how we feel about it, right? So being able to think about all of those things, bring in some of those conversations from the ether into my manuscript, I don't regret that time. However, from a publication journey point of view, it was like, you know, slow, and then boom. Yes, so COVID, I tasked myself with using this time that I suddenly found myself with to finally finish this bleeping novel. And so I did. And I happened to finish it outside of the submission window for my incredible, who, you know, did end up becoming my incredible literary agency, Curtis Brown. And so I did that thing where I went, you know, because I did know, and not everybody follows this pathway, but for me, I did feel that it was important to go through an agency and not straight to a publisher. And so I went to Curtis Brown, filled out my little form, chucked in my attachment, and immediately got back the email saying, you know, your email has disappeared into the abyss because it's outside of, you know, our publication months. Come back in a few months. And I just kind of let it go in a way. I had other projects going on, and I just kind of thought, okay, I'll come back to this a little bit later. I'll revisit it later, and tried to have a bit of, you know, my own form, a very anxious Buddhist non-attachment, right? Which I'm not great at, but I tried. And then a week or so later, I heard back from my incredible agent, Pippa Masson, saying that it somehow slipped through the cracks, right? Even though it wasn't supposed to, it landed on her desk. She read it. She had an incredibly positive reaction to it. And within a couple of weeks, we were having conversations with a few different publishing houses. And it was the team at Macmillan who I felt really creatively aligned with and could see the collaborative process working really well with. So it was a really easy yes to move forward with them. And then it all just unfolded from there.
I love it. And on that topic of collaboration, there's one particular thing I want to ask about that process, and that was how this book came together in editing. I imagine it would have gone through many iterations, many forms. And I always love when an editor gets involved. What was the editing and final crafting of this space like once the Macmillan team got in there and was like, let's really hash this out?
It was so fun, really. I have to say, it was just a delight. I had some, like the classic, forest through the trees. I don't think it's a spoiler, and if it is, you just tell me and we can backtrack. But when Christy does decide to move forward with the proposal to participate in the shot, and she undergoes her process in order to take on a new identity. That new identity's name is Imogen, and Imogen really takes on a life of her own. And how to write these two women, these two characters, who inhabit the same body, but not really the same body, but inhabit the same kind of, I guess, coordinates on the planet, was challenging from even just a structural, grammatical clarity point of view. And so having the brilliant brains over at Macmillan helped me just kind of sort through and comb through some of those tangles, so that we could really play in that space, which is a really fun and unusual kind of space to write, was incredible. And I think anytime you have, in any creative space, anytime you have other people's brilliance attuned to your work and your objective, is nothing short of a gift.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it comes through in this, because I feel like that this would have been really fun to edit and craft and put together. I want to ask, lastly, what's next for you? Will you write again? Please tell me yes. Please tell me yes.
Yes. No, I do. I have a second book coming out with Macmillan in 2024. I won't say too much more about it at the moment. I will say that it's nothing to do with the shot. Although, as I mentioned, I'd love to see the characters in the shot go on to live more life in book form someday, perhaps. But no, second book, 2024. Very different topic. What would unite them, I suppose, would be my utter addiction and fascination to very messy women whose lives unspool to a very unsustainable kind of brink, and then who attempt to try to reel it all back in. So that would be that would be where these books are on the same continuum.
We'll finish off with some very quick rapid fire questions. No pressure.
Gosh, as you've seen, I'm really great at short, brief answers. That's totally.
Well, don't worry. I know that with these ones you'll be like, oh, I got this. Bam.
Okay.
What's your favorite book that you have read in the last 12 months?
Favorite book that I have read in the last 12 months, The Overstory, Richard Powers.
Oh, haven't read that one, but I feel like I must now.
Yeah,
do you have a favorite word?
Oh, favorite word. I don't. I have a long list of favorite words. Oh my goodness. That's a hard one.
Is there a theme that comes out in your list of favorite words? I want to know, I'm curious.
Marshmallow is a word that makes me really happy. Does that count?
That counts. Yeah. That's a good word.
Yeah.
That's a nice
word. It's hard to say marshmallow with a scowl on your face. You have to soften to say the word. Yeah.
You do. I might use that next time. I'm like,
yeah, your safe word, your emotional safe word, marshmallow.
Emotional safe word. I like that.
Yeah.
Where is your favorite place to read? In bed, on the couch, or out the back in the shade on a sunny afternoon?
Oh, see, I, like probably quite a lot of readers, read very differently, and I read different things in different spaces. So I read in all of those places that you mentioned, and some others as well. But bed is the best, because I think bed is where we're telling our brains that we're getting close to dreaming, we're getting close to kind of turning off that rational thinking. And I think we get into a different headspace where we can really be just transported along into a story. Bedtime stories have been around forever.
Indeed it is. Love that one. Do you have a favorite trope? Is there a trope you go to?
I think I might have just mentioned it. Yes, I do have a trope slash, I think, becoming a genre, which is the messy women. Women whose lives have just gotten a little bit out of hand, or maybe they've just, pulled the pin and thrown a grenade at their own life for whatever reason. I can't get enough of the stories of messy, complicated women.
I love it. Great. Absolutely great.
Forever. Yes.
And then our last question. You
Yes.
hop into a lift and your
Okay.
hero is in there. Who is it?
Margaret Atwood.
Oh, yes.
That was pretty
Yes.
easy.
Oh,
For so many
yes.
reasons.
For so many. That's the best answer I've had. I reckon that's the best answer I've had. Yes, please.
And every
Margaret.
year that she, continues to write, as she journeys into her older years, is such a gift as a woman aging in the world, to see another woman hold her space, use her voice and her pen, so beautifully and consistently, and always you can read that she continues to challenge herself and ask more of herself as a writer well into her 80s. Is yes,
She's magnificent. She is magnificent. I hope we get many more amazing books out of her. I could honestly chat to you all day. I really could, particularly also diving into the themes of this book. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. For our listeners, The Shot is published by Macmillan. And if you like the show, drop Words and Nerds a review. Let us know what you think and who you'd like to hear from. I'll just finish off by saying, Naima, thank you so much. It's been great having you on.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for reading.